Hi, I'm Mox. I'm an alcoholic. A lot of you know me. I've been around for a while. I met Travis years ago at 12-step program meetings. And we didn't really click right away because I was a different person and he was a different person. I am not gonna tell his story. I'm gonna save that for him. But I am gonna tell you that the man that he is today, the brother that he is today, the son that he is today, the productive member of society that he is today, and everything that he's done with his life has made it very evident that I made a really good choice in my best friend. I know I stole that from Cars, but that's kind of how. That's how I feel about it, because he was super high speed and I was super slow in the head. And for some reason, we clicked after we both got sober and things started changing in how we acted and the things that we did and what we found was okay, and also in what we found was no longer tolerable. So I'm gonna have Travis come up and share his story. You guys are in for it. It's a great one.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Travis and I am an alcoholic. So earlier this week, I was having a pretty rough day at work and it seemed to just get progressively worse as the day went on. And after a while, I kind of noticed that I was probably making everything harder on myself than I needed to, as alcoholic tend to do when we start acting like alcoholics again. And I kind of started making the connection with the fact that I had been in a little bit of a rut in meetings lately, where I just kind of show up to the same one right on time, leave pretty promptly right after, and don't contribute a whole bunch. And I was starting to think of some ways to make some changes to that pattern so I could stop having such rough days at work. And I got a text from Crystal asking me to speak today. And I just kind of had to, I felt defeated and kind of had to laugh because this was not what I had in mind. This kind of terrifies me, but I'm getting more comfortable with it with time, and there's never really been a whole lot of growth and comfort for me anyway. And regardless of what kind of service it is, if I make myself useful to Alcoholics Anonymous, I find that I'm a lot better at managing the kind of days that I was having when I got this call from Crystal. So thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here and be just even asked. So starting at the beginning, I was born at pretty much the very end of 1985 at Community Hospital to some very, very young people. My mom was 16 and grew up in a very alcoholic house. She was kind of the only one who didn't end up an alcoholic. She did her experimenting, but her upbringing was traumatic enough for her that she did not want to live in that way. And somehow she managed to drink a few times and avoid becoming one of us. My biological father also was part of a family that were all very heavy drinkers, and he just fit right in. My mom ended up leaving Missoula with me when I was about 2 years old, due to the behavior of my dad when he was drinking. I ended up in Kalispell, where I grew up. When I was about 3 years old, my mom met the man who ended up raising me. And I had a younger brother and a younger sister over the next couple of years. And for as young and inexperienced as my parents were, I think they gave me a pretty good childhood. I can't stand up here and tell you that it was just riddled with trauma or anything. There were definitely some experiences that contributed to my life going the way it did. But I'm really grateful for the parents that I have, and all the effort that they put in. I now know that they definitely tried their best. When I was about 6 years old, my mom, kind of reverted back to something that was the only thing that brought some peace to her family when she was growing up, which was studying with Jehovah's Witnesses. And my dad followed suit pretty shortly after, so that was kind of my upbringing from about 6 years old until I left when I was 18. I was a Jehovah's Witness. My parents also homeschooled me, and all of this stuff was fine in the early years. Once I started reaching adolescence, it kind of occurred to me that I was being deprived of all the ways that everyone else was figuring out how to socialize, and I kind of started noticing the ways that I guess didn't understand how to act in a social setting. I became increasingly self-conscious of that, and increasingly I kind of put myself out there anyway among the friends that I did have. But it was a very, sheltered existence. All my friends were Jehovah's Witnesses. Most of them went to school, and seemed to have something that I didn't, I guess. Life was pretty sheltered, so I didn't start drinking at a super young age. I was about 17 when I did, and by that point, if something kind of happened when I was about 14, and I got my first guitar and started idolizing a bunch of alcoholics and junkies. I kind of had this growing fascination with getting fucked up. And by the time I did, when I was 17, it was just everything that I had hoped for it to be. There was nothing particularly eventful about it. I was with some friends who were also Jehovah's Witnesses. The oldest one he just happened to be 21 and had alcohol in his house. I had about 8, I can't even remember what they were, and threw up and went to bed. But in between, having the first one and throwing up and going to bed, we weren't even hanging out with girls, but I just knew that if we were, I was gonna be perfectly comfortable talking to all of them. I was just perfectly comfortable being myself, and more aware of who that was than I had ever really been up to that point. I was just comfortable in my own skin is the only way that I can really put it accurately. And I remember telling my friends that this was probably something I was gonna end up doing a lot. And they maybe rightfully had some concerns about that. I just thought it was great and couldn't wait to do it again. My life was still pretty sheltered. I wasn't really ready to walk away from the only thing that I had ever really known growing up. And that was a risk that I would be taking if I were to start drinking regularly and get caught. But I was incredibly fascinated with all the ways that I could think of getting intoxicated, and became increasingly obsessed and started reading about things a lot more. Some difficulties kind of hit my family around age 18, and my parents ended up splitting up. My stepdad, who raised me, started drinking a lot during that time. And that, paired with the fact that I had heard that I was genetically predisposed to alcoholism, kind of made me a little bit concerned. So I kind of, at that point, this was also my out to get away from the religion, mind you, so everything was just kind of coming together for me. But I just in time had a little bit of a warning about what alcohol could do to me. So I set out to start checking drugs off the list that I wanted to try. And there was a very long list, all the while continuing to drink here and there. Didn't really pan out like I hoped it would. I kind of figured if I spread it around a little bit that nothing would have the chance to stick. But I gravitated towards the ones that did the most for me, and that was alcohol and a handful of others. And by the time I was 21, I was pretty much drinking every night and doing whatever else came around on the weekends. Went like that for the next couple of years, when I was, I guess, 22. In 2007, I moved to Portland, Oregon with a girl that I had started dating who was from there. And her mother had Huntington's disease and she wanted to go back and be with her mom. And I was excited to get out of Kalispell where I grew up and experience life in the big city anyway. Obviously the circumstances were not great, but I was definitely happy to be there. I did not go there with a plan at all. And very quickly started being an imposition to all the hospitable people who gave me a place to stay, and mostly this was because of my drinking. But the girl I moved there with assured me that it would be okay. This is kind of what we bonded over in the first place, was drinking. She didn't drink quite like I did. And more on that a little bit later, but that was the first and last thing that brought us together. I guess the differences came up after a couple years with her, when I found that I liked to continue drinking on Saturday morning to get rid of the hangover, and she thought that was not a good idea at all. She also did not approve of any of the extracurriculars that I like to do, which I was okay with for the first little while, but felt stifled by after at a certain point. So this is kind of the part of my story where I figured out how to get really good at pushing people away so I can do what I want. It's a skill that most alcoholics have, I think. And when I finally pushed her away for good, I started moving pretty fast. And things got pretty dark pretty quickly. My house went from being a huge, the biggest party house in the particular neighborhood in Portland that I was in, to kind of an oddball trap house in that neighborhood. Overdoses were pretty common in my house. I eventually was not able to keep a job anymore and was kind of just sustaining myself by stealing from local stores. And this part of my story is really just kind of the hallmark of this phase of my alcoholism, is just this weird nihilistic state where I just could not understand why anyone would do anything else. I saw people going to work in the morning and, trying to start families and keep track of their credit score and go to church and buy a house, and like as, I felt like all those people were just kind of suckers and I had one up on them, because I didn't have to do any of that stuff to be okay. I found my purpose and all I had to do to achieve it was go out and steal some things and come back home and get fucked up. Really dark time in my life. And some scary things happened with some family. My brother ended up overdosing in my house and luckily he survived. But I was right there with him and it was something that just kind of scared the shit out of me and I wanted to make some changes. I didn't know quite what yet, but I wanted to do something. I went to Kalispell where my stepdad was. He was willing to take me in for a little while. But as far as I was concerned, alcohol was not my problem anymore. So I just picked that right back up and thought, this is what I need to do to feel okay right now. I ended up having my first experience with 12-step meetings during that time. I went a little bit intoxicated and they asked if anyone had 30 days of sobriety. It was Narcotics Anonymous, so it was clean time. And I chimed in because I had 30 days away from what I was trying to get away from. And I remember this person asking me, you have 30 days with no substances at all? And it's just, well, just alcohol. And he took back his 30-day key tag and handed me a white key tag and said, keep coming back. And then that kind of offended me, but it didn't really matter too much. I was gonna do what I was gonna do anyway. I definitely was not particularly open to anyone else's ideas on the matter. I ended up going to some outpatient groups as well, but same thing. I didn't want to hear what they were trying to tell me at all. I was pretty sure I could figure it out on my own. Bounced around Montana a little bit, ended up in Missoula for a little bit, but ultimately ended up back in Portland again, once again for a woman that I had been talking to. And this was, like nothing about this even told me at that time that this was going to be a lasting situation or a good idea to move to Portland over. But that wasn't really the reason I was going there anyway. I was going there because it was where I was the most comfortable doing what I wanted to do. I felt like I fit right in. Doing what I like to do in Portland. And things once again got pretty dark pretty fast. By the time I was 28, I was homeless for my first time ever, which early on in Portland kind of amounted to couch surfing and spending some nights just kind of walking around. I didn't really know how to utilize the resources yet. But luckily, I had a friend in Missoula who was willing to take me in, and this is kind of where I figured out how to live on the streets and how to take what I can from the system and sleep under a bridge if need be. It was a little bit of a slower burn, thanks to the resources when I moved to Missoula. But eventually I found myself in, once again, a place of pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization, and it looked a little bit different every time I reached that point. But by the end, it was just disgusting, and I was finally open to someone else's suggestion for getting away from it. I had no hustle left. I was not even allowed at the Poverello anymore. I was pretty much the only way that I could get outside of my own head was panhandling or using my food stamps to buy like cooking wine or something like that that contained alcohol, and just enjoy a few minutes of peace under the bridge, I guess. But I remember telling my drinking buddy that I stayed under the bridge with, that if an opportunity came up, that I was finally willing to try something different, and I wish I knew how to get the ball rolling and get myself to rehab. It was just crazy, like a couple days after that, it was July 13th of 2016, I passed out under a bridge, and over the course of the night, kind of rolled out from under the bridge, and it rained really hard that night, and I woke up and my skin was pale and every pale all over, but blue in some spots. Just wrinkled everywhere, I was shivering uncontrollably. My drinking buddy managed to round up $10 and sent me to the liquor store with it. And on the way there, I know it was July 13th because my mom's birthday is July 10th, and she hadn't heard from me. And the only reason I was continuous about making contact with at least her was because I wanted to lie to her and tell her that everything is okay. She kind of knew what was going on with my life, but I didn't want her to worry about it too much. She hadn't heard from me on her birthday and kind of knew something was up, and came from Sealy Lake to Missoula and just started driving around looking for me, and found me pale and blue walking up to a liquor store and asked if I was willing to come stay with her for a little bit and try to figure out how to get into a treatment center. And I said yes, and that was not the last time that I drank. It took another week to get into the treatment facility. So I just kind of snuck one last one in there. But I made it in there and just kind of about, I was glad to be off the streets, and I was at least a little bit open to trying something else. I went to MCDC and they introduced me to the 12 steps. They talked about them a lot in there. They talked about the big book a lot in there. I still didn't want to hear a whole lot about it. And in the back of my mind, I was kind of hoping that at some point I would hear something in treatment or in the rooms that was gonna be the magical key to learning how to drink like a gentleman and just get tipped back up on my feet and do what I want again, but do it in a more responsible manner. And I never found that. I left MCD and ended up at the Share House just down the road on Russell. And ended up coming to this very room a lot. I still didn't like what I was hearing. You guys talked about God a lot. This was Narcotics Anonymous. And I guess the reason that I kept coming back was I wanted to get out of the Share House, and pastime was limited. I knew a handful of people here, and I guess there was just a small part of me that was still just open to the idea of actually abstaining. And eventually I heard enough about the first step that I was willing to give the rest of the steps a try. Maybe I figured maybe you guys are right. Maybe I do actually have to put it down in order to put my life back together. And in Narcotics Anonymous, I got a lot of relief out of working the steps. I remember particularly getting through step 5 and just kind of being on fire. Like all of a sudden I had no desire to drink anymore. at least for a little while. And I just had this drive to get involved. I had a sponsor who encouraged me to start sponsoring others, even though I was not all the way through the 12 steps yet. And I did that. Continued to get a little bit of growth through step 6 and 7, and mostly enjoyed the parts of the program that kind of brought me some attention and made me feel like I looked good. Sponsoring others, getting a lot of service positions, going to business meetings and you know, getting on the cross, making passionate statements about contrary opinions to what was being brought up in business meetings, and yeah, I loved all that stuff. Once I got to step 9, it kind of stopped. I stopped being so excited about the program, I guess. I started going through the list with my sponsor at the time, and there were a handful of names. It was like my biological father. I can't make amends with this guy. Every time I hang out with him, he's saying something racist. Like I can't make amends to these credit card companies because I don't believe in that. I feel like they're a detriment to society. Same with a handful of employers that I had kind of screwed over. I made a handful of amends to the people closest to me that amounted to little more than an apology, and it wasn't even apparent to me at the time, but looking back, it is that the growth that I was getting from the program just kind of gradually started tapering off from that point. 2020 came around, and by that point, I had kind of already been making some questionable decisions. I still considered myself sober, but I was definitely knocking myself out with over-the-counter painkiller or over-the-counter sleeping pills when I did not really need to. But I was still taking them like it said to on the bottle, so I figured I was okay. But I was still coming to meetings, I guess. 2020, COVID hit, and Narcotics Anonymous kind of slowed to a trickle, and I knew that I still needed meetings. I ended up the only place where there was a consistent meeting, which was the Missoula group. And I kind of got over my old opinions that I had about Alcoholics Anonymous, because I saw a lot of people who really had what I wanted there. I wasn't really ready to give up what I was doing yet, but I was at least sticking around. Things kind of came to a head in 2021 after the death of a couple friends and a breakup, and I was still knocking myself out when I didn't really need to with over-the-counter sleeping pills, and kind of threw something else into the mix. At that point, things got a little bit worse for a while. I still considered myself sober for the start of it, because I was not drinking or doing the things that brought me the most consequences in my life before. But it was definitely increasingly, it was something that was on my radar, that maybe I was gonna have to deal with at some point. And I remember the last it would have been May 30th of 2022. I found myself just thinking really hard about what an actual relapse was going to look like. By that point, I had finally accepted that I really couldn't consider myself sober anymore. And was just kind of contending with the idea of coming to a meeting and admitting that and starting over. I had been there several nights leading up to that, and kind of woke up and changed my mind in the morning, most of the time. And something about this night scared me. Everything that I was taking was something that was supposed to, supposed to prevent nausea, but I was thinking so hard about drinking that I just kind of, I threw up. And it just scared the shit out of me, because I knew that it was familiar. It was this anticipation nausea, and that I was just knocking on the door. And if I didn't do something the next day, that it was going to get really ugly really fast. So I texted someone in the program. It was really late at night. Said, hey, can you please get a hold of me in the morning because I'm fucking up and I kind of need someone there to talk to when I'm most likely to change my mind. And I didn't really hear from that person. I think he texted back because he was at work. He didn't really know how to deal with it, but at least the effort was there. And I, went about my day and just kind of continued to think about what I was thinking about the night before. And I heard from a dear friend, the one who introduced me today, right before 12 o'clock. And he asked me what I was up to, and I told him that I was kicking around the idea of going to a meeting and starting my time over. And he said, you should probably do that before you change your mind. I'll meet you there. So I ended up at a 12 o'clock meeting and started my time over. And it was the best decision I ever made. I immediately started looking out for a sponsor who had what I want. And I remember one night where I was getting a little concerned that I might not find someone. I came to this meeting where someone shared about his first attempt at sobriety and taking handfuls of over-the-counter sleeping pills to knock himself out and shut his mind off. And I knew that was my guy. Immediately after that, he started sharing about what his life was like now, and it was just completely different. And it was just full of Alcoholics Anonymous and all the flowery language from the big book that I had grown to love. And yeah, I just knew that he had what I wanted. And things started to feel different pretty much right away once I got into the book with him and he made me read the doctor's opinion. I pushed back a little bit on the part about the physical allergy because I just couldn't find the relevance to what I had just gotten away from doing. But he said, and I can't believe this worked on me because no sponsors ever tried it before, and I don't think it would have worked if they had. But he said, "Yeah, I don't really think about that very much. Let's keep going." And we continued to read and read about the mental obsession and how after any amount of time away from drinking, I just kind of found myself back in the same spot where drinking sounded like a good idea again after it seemed like such a bad one a couple hours before, and that just hit me like a ton of bricks. And the first step had a new level of meaning to me again. And working the steps with that sponsor has been profoundly different overall, but especially once I got to the 9th step, that's when things just changed dramatically from the way they were before. This sponsor pushed me to make amends with the people that I didn't want to make amends with, and to revisit the ones that I had already made amends with that amounted to a little more than an apology. Even bring money into the equation. Within a couple weeks of starting, I had some good luck and got a big bonus at work and was able to show up to my parents, with pretty substantial amounts of cash to get them back for all the ways that they helped me out through my twenties, and just kept me alive and on my feet when I was perfectly and completely incapable of doing so myself. And I remember telling my sponsor leading into those, I really don't think my parents are gonna take my money, but I'll give it a try. And I was surprised I was met with very little. But I was also surprised at how much different I felt doing that and opening it up to the people. Opening it up to the people that I had harmed and asking them if there was any other way that I could actually make things right, instead of just assuming that I knew what the problem was. Cause it ends up being wildly different than what I thought a lot of times. I have a really good relationship with the ones that I've always been close with now, but I even have a little bit of a relationship with the ones that I was, the ones that I didn't want to deal with, the ones that I didn't want to make time for the first time, and I see the value in those relationships. I just recently started making financial amends with the institutions that I'd never really lost any sleep over in the past. That nihilistic anarchist is dying a little bit slowly, but it is dying. And you know, I'm really surprised at how much better I feel at the end of the day making those things right as well. And it really just feels incredible being, it's not something that I ever thought I wanted to be a contributing member of society, but I was talking with a friend about it last night, and I guess I just didn't realize when I was in that place where I thought everyone else was just a sucker, that I was creating the own emptiness in my life. People are kind of pack animals, and being part of a community and having a sense of purpose actually is a need. And when I'm not fulfilling that, of course I'm seeking something else. I'm seeking the bottle as a form of relief. And I do sponsor people again, and that has taken on a new meaning. It has nothing to do with looking good anymore. It's really kind of amazing to me. The promises talk about how we do not wish to shut the door on our past. And that's definitely my experience with the 12-step now. It's kind of crazy how it's come full circle, because I remember when I was in my teens and just obsessed with all the different ways that I could alter the way I felt. My next thought, before, this is ass backwards, but before I even became an active alcoholic, I wanted to be a licensed addiction counselor. I don't want to do that anymore. But I wanted to have that experience and try all the things and come out the other side, and I ended up getting a lot more than what I bargained for in alcoholism, and I'm glad I did, because if it was exactly what I bargained for, I never would have stopped. I got a little more than I bargained for, came out the other side, and now I have a story that can be useful to other alcoholics, and it's really just an amazing experience to watch other people stay sober through hard things, and I don't take credit for any of it, but I'm really glad to be a participant in it, and it gives me a little bit of purpose. So thank you for having me, and thanks again for.